The crimson sunset cast long shadows across the jagged iron canyons of planet Harlan, bathing the livingstone city of the Zalara in blood-red light. Jarrett, a scout officer of the Earth Colonial Empire, moved silently between the narrow passages, working his way deeper into Zalara territory to gather intelligence. The mission had seemed straightforward on paper: infiltrate, observe, report back on the potential for peaceful relations. Now, with the dying sun at his back and alien terrain ahead, the stakes felt considerably higher. Paused behind a jutting stone formation, watching the patterns of movement in the distance. The Zalara Confederation, an ancient alliance of blue-skinned tribes standing between 7 and 10 feet tall, had built their cities directly into the living rock. Their civilization revolved around the heart crystal, an energy core that served as both power source and spiritual center for their people. As he surveyed the landscape, Ver's hand moved to his comlink, considering whether to disable it. The device increased his risk of detection, but it was his only connection to the colonial fleet. Before he could decide, a whisper of movement from above made him freeze. Too late. 6 figures dropped from the canyon walls, surrounding him in a perfect containment formation. Their blue skin gleamed in the dying light, tribal markings etched across muscular bodies. Weapons of crystalline material pointed directly at his chest. At their center stood a female warrior, taller than the others, her skin a deeper shade of azure, eyes like twin rubies, fierce and unyielding. In her hand, she gripped a crystal spear with a visible crack running along its shaft. "Zalara territory," she said in the common galactic language, her voice carrying the distinctive resonant quality of her species. "Humans not welcome." Raised his hands slowly, mind racing through escape scenarios. Before he could speak, the female warrior stepped forward and struck him across the face, a slap that carried both physical force and profound disrespect. "That's for being human," she hissed, ruby eyes blazing. The sting spread across Ver's cheek, but rather than showing anger or fear, he turned back to her with a slow, deliberate smirk. "Then, you'll love my next trick," he replied, his voice steady despite the weapons trained on him. The warrior's eyes narrowed, confusion briefly replacing contempt. She gestured to her companions, who bound Ver's hands with crystalline cuffs that seemed to grow from a liquid into solid restraints. "I am Keisha of the Crimson Hunt," she announced. "You are now captive of the Zalara Confederation. The Council will determine your fate." As they led him toward the stone city carved into the canyon walls, Ver maintained his composure. He had expected capture was a possibility. What he hadn't anticipated was the raw hatred behind that slap. This wasn't just about territorial boundaries. This was personal. The Zalara escorts marched him through winding passages that gradually widened into a main thoroughfare. Living stone buildings rose organically from the canyon walls, their surfaces studded with bioluminescent panels that began to glow as the sunlight faded. Zalara civilians stopped to stare as the procession passed, many pointing and speaking in their native tongue, a language Ver understood better than they realized. "Another human spy," he heard one say. "They never learn," another replied. "The Council will eliminate this one, like all the others." Ver kept this knowledge to himself, focusing instead on memorizing the path, noting defensible positions, escape routes, and the composition of the Zalara forces. If he survived the coming interrogation, such details might prove crucial. They arrived at a vast circular chamber, carved directly into the heart of the canyon. 12 robed figures sat in a semicircle around a towering crystal column that pulsed with inner light, the heart crystal that powered Zalara civilization. The biologically generated illumination cast the council members as ghostly silhouettes against the living rock. Keisha pushed Ver forward, forcing him to his knees before the council. "Honored Council," she announced, "we found this human infiltrating the western passes. He carried surveillance equipment and weapons. A heavy silence fell over the chamber. Then, the central figure of the council leaned forward, features becoming visible in the crystal light. Deeply lined blue skin, eyes the color of burnished gold, wisdom and suspicion in equal measure. Human, the figure addressed Ver directly. Explain your presence in our territory. Ver looked up, meeting the council member's gaze without flinching. Then, to everyone's surprise, he responded in flawless Zelaran. Esteemed council, I come seeking knowledge, not conflict. A murmur rippled through the chamber. Keisha's eyes widened slightly, the first crack in her hostile facade. You speak our tongue, the council member observed, neither impressed nor alarmed. One of many I've learned, Ver replied. All species make the same mistake about humans. They underestimate our capacity for adaptation. This statement visibly unsettled several council members, who shifted in their stone seats. One figure to the right, a broad-shouldered Zelaran with a prominent facial scar, leaned forward aggressively. Adaptation or infiltration, he demanded. We know your kind's methods, human. You observe, you report, you invade. The pattern never changes. Council member Vork speaks truth, Keisha interjected. This capture is only the first step. We must terminate this human to eliminate the threat he represents. Ver remained calm, eyes fixed on the central figure who appeared to hold the most authority. If I meant harm, would I have allowed myself to be captured so easily? Perhaps you had no choice, another council member suggested. This one's voice more measured. Yet I find it curious you made no attempt to flee when confronted. Ver turned toward this new speaker, a slender Zelaran with intricate crystal adornments embedded in their azure skin. Council member Kosha poses a valid question. The central figure acknowledged. What say you, human? Before Ver could respond, the chamber doors burst open. A young Zelaran warrior rushed in, breathing heavily. Attack! Eastern perimeter! The deserters, they strike at the Heart Crystal Complex! The council erupted in alarmed voices. Ver caught fragments of their rapid exchanges. The deserters were a splinter faction of Zelara, violently opposed to the current leadership. This attack represented both a tactical and spiritual assault on their civilization. In the confusion, Ver noticed Kosha studying him intently, then leaning toward the central council member. Words were exchanged too quietly for him to hear. But moments later, the central figure raised a hand for silence. Ver Jared of Earth, the council leader, addressed him directly. Council member Kosha suggests you might be of use in this crisis. You appear unusually calm and observant for a captive. The deserters seek to destroy our heart crystal, our people's lifeblood. Help defend it, and perhaps we will reconsider your fate. Keisha stepped forward in protest. You would arm an enemy. Not arm, Kosha corrected. Observe. The human will remain under guard, but his perspective may prove valuable. Ver nodded slowly. I accept these terms. Keisha's eyes flashed with anger and suspicion, but she gripped Ver's arm and pulled him to his feet. You will remain with me at all times. One suspicious move, and my spear finds your heart. Minutes later, they were moving through narrow tunnels beneath the city, passages known as the Whispering Caves, for the way sound carried through their winding depths. Ver followed Keisha's lead, impressed by her ability to navigate the pitch-black passages without light. These tunnels bypass the sensor grid, she explained reluctantly. We can emerge directly beneath the enemy position. Clever, Ver remarked. They won't expect an attack from below. Keisha's grip on her cracked crystal spear tightened. This is not cooperation, human. This is survival. Yours temporarily, ours permanently. They continued in silence until faint vibrations began to tremble through the stone around them. Above, the first wave of deserters was already engaging Zelara defenders. Keisha led them to a narrow vertical shaft. Climb, she ordered, pointing to crude handholds carved into the living rock. At the top of the shaft, they emerged into a small alcove. Beyond a thin stone partition, Ver could hear voices, deserters discussing their attack plan. He caught enough to understand they intended to plant explosive charges around the Heart Crystal's foundation. 8 warriors, he whispered to Keisha. Heavily armed, but focused on their objective, not security. They don't expect anyone to approach from this direction. Keisha's ruby eyes narrowed. How do you suggest we proceed, human, since you're so observant? Ver considered for a moment. I'll create a distraction, appear frightened, draw their attention. When they focus on me, you strike from behind. She studied him suspiciously. You would risk yourself as bait? I'm risking myself either way, Ver replied with a hint of his earlier smirk. At least this way. I choose how. The plan worked perfectly. Ver stumbled into the chamber, feigning terror and confusion, drawing the deserters' attention while Keisha circled behind them. When she struck, it was with devastating efficiency, her cracked crystal spear moving in graceful, lethal arcs that dropped 3 enemies before they could react. Ver seized his moment, tackling the nearest deserter and wrestling away his weapon. The next moments blurred into chaos, crystal projectiles shattering against stone, the metallic scent of Zalaran blood, the crash of bodies against unyielding rock. When the final deserter aimed a pulse weapon at the heart crystal itself, Ver reacted without hesitation. He lunged forward, grappling the attacker to the ground, and fired a decisive shot that ended the immediate threat to the crystal. Breathing heavily, he turned to find Keisha staring at him, ruby eyes wide with something that might have been grudging reassessment. You fought well, she conceded. For a human. Ver wiped blood from a cut above his eye. You too. For someone with a broken weapon. The crack in her crystal spear seemed to catch the light. Suddenly, less a flaw, and more a distinctive mark of character. Council chambers buzzed with tension the following day. Ver stood once again before the 12 elders, but the atmosphere had shifted subtly. Council member Koshaw spoke first, recounting the defense of the heart crystal. The human not only aided in the defense but directly saved the crystal from destruction, Koshaw concluded. Such actions merit consideration. Vork, the scarred council member, leaned forward. One cooperative act does not erase the threat he represents. Humans cannot be trusted. They will betray us at the first opportunity. Keisha, standing nearby as Ver's guard, surprised everyone by speaking. Ver Jarrett fought at my side. If he cannot be trusted, then I will bear responsibility for him. A murmur rippled through the chamber. For a Zalaran to offer such responsibility for an outsider was nearly unprecedented. After lengthy deliberation, the council rendered its decision. Ver Jarrett of Earth, the central elder announced. You are granted provisional alliance status under Keisha Akar's supervision for 3 days. You may move within restricted areas of our city, but always under guard. Your actions during this period will determine your ultimate fate. Ver bowed respectfully. I accept these terms with gratitude. As they left the council chamber, intelligence reports arrived, confirming that between 50 and 100 deserters had occupied abandoned fortresses in the eastern canyons. Their leader, a disgraced former elder known as Krathmore the Broken, was planning a large-scale attack on the main city. Ver was present when Zalara military leaders gathered to discuss defensive strategies. Their traditional approach favored concentrated defense within the canyon passages, all warriors united in a single, honorable battle line. Respectfully, Ver interjected, after listening to their plans. This strategy plays to your enemy's strengths. They outnumber you. A concentrated defense allows them to bring that advantage to bear. Torval, the Supreme Commander, a towering Zalaran with ancient sediment scars across his chest, fixed Ver with a penetrating stare. What alternative do you propose, human? Guerrilla tactics, Ver replied. Small, mobile teams harassing different points of their advance. Never engage their full force. Strike, then withdraw. Force them to divide their numbers to chase phantoms. Many tribal leaders objected immediately. Such tactics do not honor our traditional ways of battle, one protested. Your traditional ways were designed for fighting other honorable warriors, Ver countered. The deserters have already abandoned tradition by attacking the heart crystal itself. Why handicap yourselves with rules they don't follow? The debate raged for hours, with Keisha remaining silent but watchful throughout. Eventually, Torval raised his massive hand for silence. The human strategy, though foreign to our ways, offers a better chance of victory than capitulation, he declared. Better to try a new approach than surrender our home. Later that evening, as twilight painted the canyon walls, Keisha found Ver sitting on a stone outcropping, tending to a small, injured canyon crawler, a six-legged reptilian creature that had apparently fallen from above. He had torn a strip from his own clothing to bandage the creature's broken limb. She watched silently for a moment before speaking. You show compassion to a creature most Zalara consider vermin. Ver glanced up, continuing his careful bandaging. Life is life. Besides, it didn't choose to be born a crawler. Keisha settled beside him, her tall frame dwarfing his. Tell me of Earth. Are there many like you there? Ver smiled faintly. No two humans are truly alike. That's both our strength and our challenge. He described coffee shops in ancient cities, his sister's research into xenobiology, the controversial policies of colonial expansion. For the first time, Keisha saw a human as something other than an invader, as a being with history, culture, family. The realization unsettled her deeply, making her question beliefs she'd held since childhood. You're not what I expected, she admitted finally. Ver gently released the bandaged crawler, watching it scurry away. Few things ever are, in my experience. Intelligence reports grew increasingly alarming over the following days. Hundreds of deserter warriors had rallied under Krathmore's banner, preparing to seize the Grand Canyon, the ceremonial heart of Zalara territory. Tribal leaders gathered for urgent deliberations. Many advocated for a massive frontal assault, one decisive battle to determine their fate. Ver, now permitted to speak at these councils, warned against this approach. You remain outnumbered, he insisted. A direct confrontation plays to Krathmore's advantage. What would you have us do instead? Demanded a tribal elder. Hide in shadows while they take our sacred grounds? Not hide. Hunt. Ver clarified. Divide your forces into small, mobile teams. Target their supply lines. Destroy bridges after they cross. Force them to commit resources to protecting their flanks. Make them fight 20 small battles instead of one large one. After heated debate, the Grand Council voted to adopt Ver's strategy, largely due to Torval's sobering assessment. Better to try an unfamiliar path than march proudly to certain defeat. The first phase of the plan involved dispersing forces along the main canyon approaches, concealing their positions and strength. Ver trained Rashkar and Morak's tribe warriors in guerrilla tactics, teaching them to strike quickly and withdraw, rather than stand and fight to the death as tradition dictated. Keisha volunteered to lead an elite team tasked with harassing deserter advance units, destroying bridges, creating false trails, and forcing the enemy to expend resources on security rather than assault. Her mission would buy crucial time for other teams to establish their positions. The night before operations began, Ver and Keisha stood on a high outcropping overlooking the canyon maze, watching distant dust clouds that signaled deserter movement. Your people are adapting quickly to these new tactics, Ver observed. Keisha nodded. Necessity is a harsh but effective teacher. When this is over, Ver said after a pause, I hope to discuss something beyond mere survival, the possibility of a lasting peace between our peoples. Keisha turned to study him, ruby eyes reflecting starlight. You think beyond the battle, bold, for someone whose life still hangs in balance. Hope requires boldness, Ver replied simply. The night before the decisive confrontation, Zalara forces executed a strategic feint, appearing to abandon their city and retreat deeper into the canyons. This deliberate move encouraged the deserters to believe they faced minimal resistance, drawing them deeper into the trap. An elite infiltration team, consisting of 6 warriors, Keisha, Ver, and 4 members from different tribes, set out for the dark passages of the Whispering Caves. Their mission: scale the treacherous outer walls and approach Crathmore's headquarters directly, while the main forces were occupied elsewhere. The ascent proved grueling. Sheer rock faces offered minimal handholds, and the darkness was nearly absolute, broken only by the faint glow of Keisha's cracked crystal spear. One misstep meant certain death on the jagged rocks hundreds of feet below. Upon reaching the outer perimeter of Crathmore's fortress, Ver employed his Earth technology, an optical enhancer that revealed a blind spot in the enemy sensor grid. "There," he whispered, indicating a narrow approach between 2 guard posts. "Their detection system has a 3-second lag in that sector." Keisha took the lead, her crystal spear striking with silent precision to eliminate the ceremonial guard. Ver moved immediately afterward, neutralizing a deserter who was reaching for the alarm controls. Their coordinated assault created an opening for the rest of the team to infiltrate the compound. Deep within the fortress, they encountered Crathmore himself, a massive, scarred Zalaran, whose blue skin bore ritualistic burn patterns that marked him as an outcast. When Keisha engaged him directly, the battle was spectacular and terrifying, her nimble movements contrasting with Crathmore's overwhelming power as he swung a massive squared crystal blade. Ver watched for an opening, aware that direct intervention might distract Keisha as much as help her. When Crathmore launched a brutal overhead strike, Keisha rolled aside, her spear slicing deep into his shoulder. The deserter leader howled in pain and rage, staggering backward toward an elaborate control column. Realizing Crathmore was reaching for a weapon that might target the delicate crystal matrix nearby, Ver made a split-second decision. He lunged forward, tackling the massive Zalaran before Keisha's follow-up shot could potentially damage the crystal. Together, they brought the rebel leader down, subduing him before he could activate the device. As they secured their prisoner, a sudden rumble shook the fortress. Part of the Whispering Caves had collapsed, blocking their planned escape route. "We need to find another way out," one of the team members urged, already turning toward an alternative passage. "Wait," Keisha called, noticing Ver wasn't following. He had been partially buried by falling debris, his leg trapped beneath a heavy stone slab. "Go," Ver insisted through gritted teeth. "Complete the mission." Keisha hesitated only a moment before issuing orders to the rest of the team. "Secure Crathmore. I'll follow with the human." As the others departed with their prisoner, Keisha worked frantically to free Ver from the rubble. "Live to fight another day," she grunted, straining against the stone. With a final heave, she pulled him free, his leg bloodied but intact. Supporting his weight, they limped toward the exit, even as more of the passage began to collapse around them. "Why risk yourself?" Ver asked, as they navigated the treacherous escape route. Keisha's ruby eyes met his. "Because allies don't abandon allies," she replied simply. The news of Crathmore's capture spread rapidly through the canyon network. Alarm horns echoed from the narrow passes, and thousands of deserter warriors, suddenly leaderless, fell into disarray. Some sought to surrender, others simply dispersed, while the remainder fragmented into uncoordinated groups that were easily contained. Zalara tribal leaders and council members convened an emergency meeting, voting to secure the heart crystal in its sacred position and to organize a victory celebration along the outer rim of the Grand Council Canyon. 3 days later, as Ver's leg healed under Zelaran medical care, a special council session was called. Keisha, as tribal leader of the Crimson Hunt, formally proposed that Ver Jarrett be granted Zalaran citizenship with the title of Strategic Advisor, recognizing his invaluable contribution to protecting the heart crystal and quelling the rebellion. As the crimson sunset painted the canyon walls, a solemn ceremony took place. Keisha presented Ver with her cracked crystal spear, her trusted battle companion, inscribed with words in both languages. I am your blood. The crack in the weapon, once considered a flaw, had become a symbol of their unlikely bond. Ver accepted the weapon with proper ceremonial phrases, completing the blood brother ritual that formally connected him to Zalaran society. What had begun with a contemptuous slap had transformed into one of the most significant diplomatic breakthroughs in colonial history. A 3-day festival followed, with all levels of Zalara society joining in songs, dances, and celebrations of their new unity. Ver moved through crowds of blue-skinned revelers, greeted with respect, not merely as the human, but as the savior of Zalara. On the final evening, Keisha and Ver stood on a city balcony, watching the throngs of dancers below, illuminated by bioluminescent light. The canyon wind carried a chill, but neither seemed to notice. "Do you regret that slap now?" Ver asked, a hint of his characteristic smirk returning. Keisha's ruby eyes sparkled with humor. "If the slap didn't make you interested in the next act, I fear our work remains unfinished." Ver laughed, and Keisha joined him, their shared mirth carrying hope for the future of their peoples. The alliance between Earth and Zalara would face many challenges in the years ahead, but its foundation had been laid in the most unexpected way, with a slap, a smirk, and a promise of something more interesting to come. Ver adjusted the ceremonial armor Keisha had insisted he wear for the final day of celebrations. The livingstone material felt surprisingly light against his skin, molding itself to his human physiology in a way that still fascinated him. "Too tight?" Keisha asked, noticing his movements as she entered his quarters. "No, just different," Ver replied. "On Earth, our formal wear doesn't usually adapt to us." Keisha's lips curved in what he now recognized as amusement. "Primitive," she teased, the word carrying none of its former contempt. Together, they made their way to the Grand Assembly Plaza, where thousands of Zalara had gathered for the closing ceremony. The 12 council members stood in formation around a miniature version of the heart crystal, its pulsing light casting their elongated shadows across the stone floor. The central elder stepped forward as Ver and Keisha approached. "Today, we honor not just victory, but transformation," the elder announced, voice carrying across the hushed crowd. "Ver Jarrett came to us as stranger, fought as ally, and now stands as brother." A rhythmic chant began to rise from the assembled Zalara, a traditional sound of acceptance that reverberated through the canyon walls. Ver felt the vibrations in his chest, a physical manifestation of his new place among these people. The elder raised a crystalline staff. "The council records show no precedent for what we undertake today. No human has ever been granted the status of strategic advisor to all tribes. Yet no human has ever proven themselves as you have." Ver bowed his head in the Zalaran gesture of humble acceptance. "I pledge my knowledge and strength to the Confederation," he responded in their language, the formal words Keisha had taught him. The elder nodded approvingly, then turned to Keisha. "Tribal leader of the Crimson Hunt, you who first captured this human, who first struck him in judgment, what say you now of his character?" Keisha stepped forward, her ceremonial armor catching the crystal light. "I say that true strength reveals itself not in dominance, but in adaptation. Ver Jarrett has shown us that different perspectives create resilience. His tactics preserved not just lives, but our way of life." She turned to face Ver directly. "When I slapped you, I thought I was striking an enemy. Now, I understand I was greeting a teacher." Ver's eyes widened slightly at this unexpected declaration. According to Zalaran tradition, acknowledging another as teacher was one of their highest forms of respect. The elder nodded solemnly. "Then, let it be recorded in the Crystal Archives, Ver Jarrett of Earth, blood brother to Keisha Akar, strategic advisor to the Zalara Confederation." Crystal resonators throughout the plaza amplified the cheers that followed, creating a symphony of approval that seemed to shake the very mountains. As the formal ceremony concluded, tribal celebrations erupted throughout the city. Crystalline towers illuminated with patterns telling the story of the recent victory, while young Zalara performed traditional battle dances, adapted to incorporate the new guerrilla tactics that had saved their civilization. Ver found himself approached by tribal elders who had once viewed him with suspicion, now eager to discuss collaborative strategies and exchange cultural knowledge. Children, rare among the long-lived Zalara, shyly requested demonstrations of human movement patterns, giggling at his comparatively limited flexibility. Late into the night, as celebrations continued below, Ver retreated to a quiet observation platform carved into the highest spire of the city. The triple moons of Harlan cast silver light across the canyon landscape, transforming the harsh terrain into something almost ethereal. "Seeking escape already," Keisha's voice came from behind him. Ver turned, smiling. "Just a moment to process. It's been an eventful few weeks." She moved to stand beside him, her tall frame silhouetted against the starry sky. "You've changed us, you know. More than just our battle tactics." "How so?" "For generations, we've viewed outsiders, especially humans, as threats to be eliminated," she explained, her voice thoughtful. "Now my people speak of the Ver approach to conflicts. They mean finding unexpected solutions, considering perspectives beyond tradition." Ver leaned against the stone railing. "My superiors at Colonial Command would never believe this. They sent me expecting, at best, a preliminary assessment for future diplomatic missions. At worst, they expected intelligence to plan military operations." "And instead," Keisha prompted. "Instead, I found myself in the middle of a civil war, helping blue-skinned warriors defend their sacred crystal from their own kind." He laughed softly. "And somehow becoming a blood brother to the woman who initially wanted me executed." Keisha's ruby eyes reflected the moonlight as she studied him. "What will you tell them, your superiors?" Ver considered this seriously. "The truth, that the Zalara are not potential conquests or mere allies of convenience. That true partnership is possible, beneficial to both our peoples. And if they disagree, then I remind them that I now hold dual citizenship." Ver replied, with a hint of his characteristic smirk. "My loyalty extends to the Confederation as well as Earth." Keisha nodded, satisfaction evident in her posture. They stood in comfortable silence, watching distant lightning illuminate the far reaches of the canyon system. "Tomorrow, the tribal leaders from the eastern reaches arrive," Keisha said eventually. "They've requested your presence at their strategic council." "They were the most opposed to my tactics initially," Ver recalled. "Now they wish to learn," Keisha confirmed. "Your victory has earned their attention, if not yet their trust." "Our victory," Ver corrected gently. Keisha acknowledged this with a slight incline of her head. "There is something else," she added, her tone shifting subtly. "Word has come from our outpost near the planetary defense grid. Your colonial vessel has been attempting communication." Ver straightened, surprise evident in his expression. "They weren't due to check in for another month." "Perhaps they grew concerned at your lack of regular reports," Keisha suggested, watching him carefully. Ver understood the unspoken question in her gaze. His position was unprecedented, a bridge between worlds that had previously viewed each other with hostility and suspicion. His next actions would establish precedent for whatever relationship might develop between Earth and Zalara. "I should respond," he said finally. "But I'd like you to be present when I do. This isn't just my decision anymore." Relief flickered across Keisha's features, quickly masked by her characteristic stoicism. "Agreed. We'll arrange secure communication for the morning." As they prepared to return to the celebrations below, Ver paused, a thought occurring to him. "Keisha, I've been meaning to ask, Why did you keep that cracked spear all this time? Surely a tribal leader could have commanded a flawless weapon. Keisha's expression softened. The crack appeared during my first hunt as leader. I should have failed. My prey was escaping. My perfect weapon damaged. But I adapted. Used the jagged edge in a way that wasn't traditional, and succeeded despite the flaw. She ran a finger along the inscription she had carved for the Blood Brother ceremony. I kept it to remind myself that perfection is less valuable than adaptability, that flaws can become strengths when properly understood. Ver nodded, understanding dawning. So when you gave it to me, I gave you not just a weapon, but a philosophy, Keisha confirmed. One I believe you already understood, even before we met. The following morning, Ver stood beside Keisha in the secure communication chamber, deep within the Heart Crystal Complex. The colonial transmission came through with surprising clarity, Commander Severin's face appearing on the crystalline display. Officer Jarrett, the commander began formally, relief evident in her expression. We've been attempting contact for weeks. Are you in distress? Ver straightened to attention out of habit. No, Commander. I apologize for the communication delay. Circumstances evolved rapidly after my arrival. The commander's eyes darted to Keisha, standing tall beside Ver. I see you have company. Are you speaking freely, officer? Completely freely, Commander, Ver assured her. Allow me to introduce Keisha Akar, tribal leader of the Crimson Hunt and my blood sister under Zalaran law. Commander Severin's expression cycled rapidly through confusion, concern, and cautious interest. Blood sister, Jarrett, your mission parameters were observation only. With respect, Commander, I encountered a situation requiring immediate action. Ver explained. The Zalara Confederation was facing internal conflict that threatened not only their civilization, but potentially all planetary stability. I made a judgment call to render assistance. And now you've apparently gone native, Severin observed dryly. Keisha stepped forward. Commander of Earth, your officer has been granted unprecedented status among our people. He has proven himself a warrior of honor and insight. The Zalara Council has voted unanimously to establish formal diplomatic relations with your colonial authority, with Ver Jarrett as our chosen intermediary. Severin leaned back, visibly processing this unexpected development. That's not within my authority to approve. Tribal leader Akar, such decisions require colonial high command involvement. Of course, Ver acknowledged. But you can relay our proposal and the initial framework we've developed. He transmitted a data packet containing the preliminary alliance terms the Council had approved. Trade agreements, cultural exchange protocols, mutual defense considerations. This is highly irregular, Jarrett, Severin said after scanning the documents. But potentially valuable. The colonial expansion program has faced significant challenges in this sector. A peaceful alliance with an established indigenous civilization would set an important precedent. Then you'll support our proposal, Ver asked. I'll present it objectively, Severin replied carefully. High Command will want a full debriefing, from you personally, Jarrett. Ver nodded. I understand. Request permission to bring a Zalaran delegation to the orbital rendezvous point. The commander's eyebrows rose. You're requesting permission to bring aliens to a secure colonial facility? If we're discussing alliance, Commander, mutual trust must begin somewhere, Ver pointed out. The Zalara have already extended unprecedented access to their sacred sites and governance structures. After a long pause, Severin nodded. Permission granted, provisionally. Maintain this communication channel for coordination details. When the transmission ended, Keisha turned to Ver with an unreadable expression. Your commander seemed less enthusiastic than you hoped. She's cautious, Ver acknowledged. But forwarding our proposal is a significant first step. Colonial bureaucracy moves slowly, but I know influential voices who will support this initiative once they understand its potential. And if they reject it, Keisha pressed, if they demand your return without recognizing our alliance? Ver's expression hardened slightly. Then they'll have a diplomatic incident on their hands. I meant what I said about dual citizenship. Keisha, I won't abandon what we've built here. Her ruby eyes searched his for a moment before she nodded, apparently satisfied by what she found there. The next weeks brought a flurry of preparations. The council selected representatives from each major tribe to accompany Ver and Keisha to the orbital rendezvous, the first Zalara delegation to officially leave their planet in generations. Ancient ceremonial vessels were refurbished with modern propulsion systems, creating an armada that honored tradition while embracing innovation. On the evening before their departure, Ver found himself once again on the high observation platform, watching the sunset paint the canyons in shades of amber and crimson. The view had become familiar, almost comforting, in the relatively short time he'd spent on this once alien world. Second thoughts? Keisha asked, joining him at the railing. Ver shook his head. Just appreciating the view, wondering how to convey all this. He gestured toward the breathtaking landscape. To people who see only strategic value and resource potential. Keisha placed her hand on his shoulder, the gesture of affection she'd adopted since their blood-sibling ceremony. Show them what you showed me. That different perspectives create strength, not weakness. And if they see only the crack in the spear, not its unique utility? Ver asked, voicing his deepest concern. Keisha's lips curved in a rare full smile. Then you'll have to show them your next trick. Ver laughed, the tension in his shoulders easing. I suppose I will. As twilight deepened into night, they remained side by side, human and Zalaran, watching the stars emerge, the same stars that would guide their journey toward an uncertain but hopeful future. What had begun with a contemptuous slap had evolved into something neither could have imagined. A bond between worlds, forged in crisis, strengthened through understanding, and now poised to transform the relationship between their civilizations forever. And it all started with those fateful words, "That's for being human." To which the only proper response had been, "Then you'll love my next trick." Indeed, Ver reflected as the moons rose over Harlan. His next trick, building a lasting peace between Earth and Zalara, might prove to be his most impressive yet. The colonial orbital station hung like a metallic spider against the velvet backdrop of space, its multiple docking arms extended to accommodate the approaching Zalaran vessels. From the command deck of the lead ship, Ver observed the reactions of the colonial officers visible through the station's observation ports. Their expressions, a mixture of awe and apprehension, as the ancient yet modernized Zalaran fleet approached. "They fear us," Torval noted, his massive frame making the command chair appear almost comically small. "They respect your strength," Ver corrected. Fear and respect often look similar from a distance. Keisha, standing at the tactical station, nodded in agreement. "The distinction will become clear once we begin negotiations." Communication channels crackled with colonial protocols, docking sequences, security procedures, diplomatic courtesies recited in the formal cadence of military procedure. Ver responded appropriately, bridging the gap between Zalaran ceremonial communication and colonial efficiency. As their vessel secured itself to the primary docking collar, Ver addressed the assembled delegation. "Remember, what happens here will establish the foundation for generations of interaction between our peoples. Dignity, always. Aggression, never. But never mistake courtesy for submission." The Zalaran representatives nodded solemnly. Each had been chosen for their expertise. Torval for military matters, Elder Koshaw for governance, representatives from the artisan guilds, energy development councils, and agricultural collectives. Together, they embodied the full spectrum of Zalaran society. The airlock cycled open to reveal Commander Severin flanked by colonial officers in formal dress uniforms. Her eyes widened slightly at the imposing appearance of the Zalaran delegation. Their height, the vivid blue of their skin, the crystalline adornments that signified their rank and lineage. "Officer Jarrett," she acknowledged, recovering quickly. "Welcome back to colonial jurisdiction, and welcome to our Zalaran guests." She performed a credible approximation of the Zalaran greeting gesture Ver had taught her during their preparation communications. Keisha stepped forward, returning the gesture with perfect form. "The Zalara Confederation appreciates your hospitality. Commander Severin, we come seeking understanding and alliance." The formalities continued as they moved through the station toward the conference facilities. Colonial personnel stopped to stare as the procession passed, many having never seen non-human sentience up close before. Ver noted with approval that his Zalaran companions maintained their composure, neither offended by the scrutiny nor intimidated by the unfamiliar environment. The conference room had been modified to accommodate the Zalarans' larger physiology, with reinforced seating and raised table heights. Holographic displays showed rotating views of both Earth and Harlan, a visual reminder of the distance, both physical and cultural, these negotiations sought to bridge. "Colonial High Command has reviewed your preliminary proposal," Commander Severin began, once everyone was seated. "They find it intriguing, but have significant questions about implementation and enforcement." "As do we," Elder Kosha responded smoothly. "Any meaningful alliance must address the imbalance of military presence in this sector and establish clear boundaries for cultural exchange." What followed was 3 days of intensive negotiations. The Zalarans proved themselves skilled diplomats, neither yielding crucial points nor becoming entrenched in positions that prevented progress. Ver found himself alternating between roles, sometimes advocating for colonial interests to the Zalarans, other times explaining Zalaran concerns to increasingly receptive colonial officials. On the final day, as they approached consensus on the framework agreement, Admiral Thornton arrived, the highest-ranking colonial officer in the sector, sent specifically to evaluate the proposed alliance. His reputation preceded him, efficient, pragmatic, and notoriously skeptical of non-human civilizations. "Officer Jarrett," the Admiral addressed Ver directly during a private meeting before the final session. "Your service record shows an exemplary career. Your current situation is therefore all the more perplexing." Ver stood at attention. "Sir, you were sent to gather intelligence on a potentially hostile alien civilization," Thornton continued, pacing the small briefing room. "Instead, you've apparently gone native, taken their rituals, advocated for their interests, even accepted some form of ceremonial kinship. With respect, Admiral, I've executed my mission parameters with complete fidelity." Ver responded calmly. "I was tasked with determining whether peaceful relations with the Zalara were possible. I've not only confirmed that possibility, but established a functional framework for its implementation." Thornton stopped pacing to fix Ver with a penetrating stare. "At what cost to your primary loyalties, officer?" Ver met his gaze unflinchingly. "Sir, the colonial mandate includes establishing stable interspecies alliances that expand human influence without necessitating military conquest. The relationship I've helped foster with the Zalara represents the ideal outcome of that mandate. And your personal attachments, this blood sister arrangement, has given me unprecedented access to and influence within Zalaran society," Ver replied without hesitation. "It's a diplomatic asset, not a compromise." The Admiral studied him for a long moment before nodding slowly. "You make a compelling case, Jarrett. But understand this. If I authorize this alliance, your role becomes more critical, not less. You'll be the linchpin holding it together, accountable to both sides. Can you handle that responsibility?" "I already am, sir," Ver said simply. When they rejoined the main conference, Admiral Thornton surprised everyone by announcing his provisional approval of the alliance framework. The colonial authority recognizes the strategic and cultural value of peaceful cooperation with the Zalara Confederation, he stated formally. Subject to ratification by the full Colonial Council, we accept the terms negotiated here and propose immediate implementation of the cultural exchange and mutual defense protocols. The Zalaran delegation received this announcement with dignified satisfaction. Keisha, catching Ver's eye across the table, allowed herself a brief smile, the equivalent of exuberant celebration by her stoic standards. The signing ceremony took place in the station's central atrium, witnessed by representatives from both societies. As Ver added his signature to both the colonial and Zalaran versions of the document, he reflected on the improbable journey that had brought him to this moment. From captive to advisor, from outsider to blood brother, from scout to diplomat, each transition had seemed impossible until it was accomplished. "Your thoughts, blood brother?" Keisha asked quietly, as they watched the formal reception that followed the signing. "I'm thinking about how sometimes the most significant changes begin with moments of conflict," Ver replied. "If you hadn't slapped me that day." "If you hadn't responded with that insufferable smirk," she countered, ruby eyes glinting with humor. "We might never have discovered what was possible between our peoples," he finished. Around them, colonials and Zalarans engaged in cautious but increasingly comfortable interactions. Torval was demonstrating traditional warrior stances to fascinated colonial security officers. Elder Koshaw and Admiral Thornton were deep in conversation about governance systems. Cultural barriers were being tested, challenged, and carefully dismantled. "There will be setbacks," Keisha observed realistically. "Centuries of isolation and suspicion cannot be overcome in weeks or months. But the foundation is laid," Ver affirmed, "and it's stronger than either side anticipated." As the reception concluded and the delegations prepared to return to their respective vessels, Commander Severin approached Ver with formal transfer orders. "High Command has created a new position," she explained, handing him the crystalline data tablet. "Interspecies Liaison Officer, with diplomatic credentials and direct reporting access to the Colonial Council. You'll maintain your dual citizenship and divide your time between Earth and Harlan as needed." Ver accepted the orders with surprise. "This is unprecedented." "So is everything about this situation, Jarrett," Severin replied with a hint of amusement. "You've created quite the career path for yourself." Later, as the Zalaran vessels prepared to depart the station and return to Harlan, Ver stood with Keisha in the observation dome, watching the stars wheel slowly against the backdrop of space. "When I return to Harlan next month, the Eastern Reach tribes want to begin training in your tactical systems," Keisha informed him. "They've requested you personally oversee the program." "And the Council approved this?" Ver asked, knowing how carefully the Zalarans guarded their military traditions. "Unanimously," Keisha confirmed. "You're no longer the human to them. You're Ver Jarrett, strategic advisor, the blood brother who helped save our civilization." Ver considered this remarkable transformation. From captive to instructor, in less than a full lunar cycle. Not bad for someone who earned his introduction with a slap to the face. Keisha's expression grew serious. "About that, I never properly apologized for striking you." "No need," Ver assured her. "It was a fitting introduction to your culture, direct, honest, and memorable." "Still," she insisted, "it was born of prejudice I no longer hold." Ver smiled. "Then let's consider it the opening move in a game neither of us knew we were playing. One that ultimately both sides won." As their vessels separated from the colonial station and prepared for the journey back to Harlan, Ver found himself standing on the bridge beside his Zalaran allies, now friends, now family by their ancient laws. The path ahead contained uncertainties, challenges that would test their newfound alliance. But the foundation had been laid with honesty, respect, and the recognition that different perspectives created strength rather than weakness. "Prepare for transition to inner space," Torval announced from the command chair. Ver took his position at the navigation console, working in perfect coordination with the Zalaran crew. As the stars outside began to blur with their acceleration, he exchanged a glance with Keisha, a silent acknowledgement of how far they had come, and how much further they might go together. All because of a slap, a smirk, and the promise of something more interesting to come. Die. 1 year later, Ver stood at the edge of the Grand Canyon on Harlan, watching as the combined Earth-Zalara science team carefully extracted core samples from the living stone. The research project, studying the unique properties of Harlan's semi-sentient geology, represented everything the Alliance had hoped to achieve: shared knowledge, mutual respect, and collaborative discovery. The preliminary results are fascinating. Dr. Elaine Chen, the colonial xenogeologist, reported excitedly. The stone literally adapts its molecular structure in response to external stimuli. Nothing like this exists in any previously cataloged system. Torval, overseeing the Zalaran side of the expedition, nodded solemnly. Our ancestors knew this intuitively. They did not carve our cities from the rock. They communed with it, persuaded it to grow into the forms they envisioned. That's not scientifically possible. Another colonial researcher objected, then caught himself. Or rather, it wasn't considered scientifically possible until now. Ver smiled at the exchange. These small moments of cultural friction followed by adjustment had become familiar over the past year. The growing pains of two civilizations, learning to communicate across profound differences in worldview. Keisha approached from the temporary research facility, her ceremonial armor replaced by the practical gear of a field expedition leader. The council representatives have arrived for the inspection, she informed Ver. They seem particularly interested in the water reclamation project. Together, they made their way to the sprawling complex that had risen at the canyon's edge, a hybrid structure combining colonial technology with Zalaran architectural principles. Inside, Elder Koshaw led a delegation of council members through laboratories where scientists from both worlds worked side by side. The Alliance has exceeded our cautious expectations, Koshaw acknowledged as Ver and Keisha joined the tour. 12 collaborative projects established, trade routes secured, and cultural exchange programs flourishing in just one orbital cycle. The Colonial Council shares your assessment, Ver confirmed. The Zalara Earth Alliance is being studied as a model for other interspecies diplomatic initiatives. One council member, a representative from the traditionally conservative Northern Spires, appeared less convinced. Yet we hear concerns from some tribal communities about cultural contamination. The younger Zalara increasingly adopt human expressions, technologies, even clothing styles. Cultural exchange flows both ways, Keisha pointed out. Have you not noticed how many colonial researchers now wear crystalline pendants? How many have adopted our meditation practices and dietary principles? Change is inevitable, Ver added diplomatically. The question is whether we guide that change together or resist it separately. The inspection continued through medical facilities, agricultural experimental stations, and finally to the Heart Crystal Auxiliary Chamber, a sacred space where Zalaran priests worked alongside colonial energy specialists to understand the unique properties of the crystal formation at the center of their civilization. This collaboration would have been unthinkable a year ago, Elder Koshaw observed, to allow outsiders access to our most sacred technology, just as sharing colonial propulsion systems would have once been considered treasonous. Ver noted, trust builds slowly, but compounds rapidly once established. That evening, a formal reception brought together the research teams, council members, and colonial officials in the grand hall of the newly constructed Interspecies Cooperation Center. The architecture itself told the story of their alliance, soaring crystalline arches designed by Zalaran artisans, supported by colonial engineering techniques, illuminated by a harmonious blend of earth lighting technology and Harlan's bioluminescent panels. Ver found a quiet moment alone with Keisha on one of the observation balconies overlooking the canyon. The triple moons of Harlan cast their silver light across the landscape, turning the rugged terrain into a ghostly wonderland. "Remember when you wanted me executed?" Ver asked with a smile. Keisha's ruby eyes gleamed with amusement. "Remember when you were an arrogant human infiltrator who thought he knew everything?" "I still am," Ver replied lightly. "Just more officially recognized now." Their easy banter belied the significance of what they had accomplished. The interspecies liaison office that Ver directed had grown from a single-person operation to a thriving diplomatic corps with representatives from both civilizations. Keisha, once simply a tribal leader, now served as the Zalaran High Ambassador to Earth, dividing her time between planets just as Ver did. "The Eastern Reach delegation arrives tomorrow," Keisha noted, turning serious. "They'll want updates on the defensive shield integration." Ver nodded. "The engineering team has resolved the compatibility issues. The crystal-enhanced deflectors show a 30% efficiency improvement over standard colonial designs. And the Cultural Ambassador Program? 20 Zalaran youth prepared to begin their education cycle on Earth, with a matching cohort of human students arriving next month," Ver confirmed. "The first true exchange of our next generation." They fell into comfortable silence, watching distant lightning illuminate the far reaches of the canyon system. So much had changed. Yet the fundamental landscape remained, just as their distinct cultures continued to thrive, even as they found new ways to interact. "I received a communication from Admiral Thornton today," Ver mentioned eventually. "The Colonial Council has approved expansion of the Alliance framework. They're proposing to include the Malar Collective from the Rigel sector." Keisha raised an eyebrow. "Ambitious. The Malar have resisted colonial contact for decades. They've expressed interest specifically because of how the Zalara-Earth Alliance functions," Ver explained. "Our model of genuine partnership rather than assimilation or subjugation has attracted attention throughout the sector." "The Council will need time to consider such an expansion," Keisha cautioned. "Many elders still adjust to human presence alone." Ver nodded in understanding. "There's no rush. We're building something meant to last generations, not just administrative cycles." As the celebration continued inside, Ver reflected on the improbable journey that had brought them to this point. From that first confrontation in the canyon, her contemptuous slap, his defiant smirk, to creating a blueprint for peaceful coexistence that might eventually transform interspecies relations throughout known space. "What are you thinking, blood brother?" Keisha asked, noticing his contemplative expression. "I'm thinking about how sometimes the universe has a peculiar sense of humor," Ver replied. "That the worst diplomatic introduction in colonial history somehow led to its greatest diplomatic success." Keisha smiled, placing her hand on his shoulder in the gesture of affection that had become familiar between them. "Perhaps it wasn't the worst introduction after all. Perhaps it was exactly what we both needed, to see each other clearly, without pretense." Ver covered her hand with his own, human and Zalaran, different in form but united in purpose. "To seeing clearly," he agreed softly. Below them, in the Grand Hall, humans and Zalarans continued their celebration, not just of what they had accomplished, but of what they might yet achieve together. Different perspectives creating strength, not weakness. Different traditions offering wisdom, not obstacles. Different biologies providing opportunities, not limitations. All because of a slap, a smirk, and the promise of something more interesting to come. The end.